Right. Hello then. Good morning and a very warm welcome to this demo class. I can see that a lot of people have joined in correctly with audio. I can see some of the others are still joining in. Fine, we'll give them a couple of minutes. Let's see if they can. So a warm welcome again. And before we begin with the class, there are just a couple of things that I would like to start with. So first of all, let me just try and introduce myself. My name is Ashay. Please don't get it confused with Akshay. People usually do that. It's Ashay, right? And I'm going to be your IELTS faculty for this batch. So I have 8 years of teaching experience. I have taught in China for 1.5 years. I was there in Thailand as well, where I've taught for 3.5 years. I've been teaching here now for 3.5 years as well. So, my goal here is very simple. I am here to ensure that whatever your target scores are, you succeed in achieving them, and maybe you also try and push them upwards as well. And that is what my aim is going to be, right? So before we start with the class, before we start with the IELTS, just a couple of things that I would like to point out here. So we're going to be using the Zoom interface throughout this batch. Right, this particular app that all of you are using today, we'll be using the same app throughout. So just for today, due to safety reasons, we have enabled this mute all option. So you'll not be able to talk to me today directly. But for all the other classes, right, from the regular classes that we'll start tomorrow onwards, you'll have the option where you can unmute and ask me a question directly. Not a problem. So just for today, I would like all of you to use the chat option. Right. So whenever you have a question or a query, just for today, you can use the chat so that we can have an interaction through it. Right. I'm going to send everybody a message in the chat. I just want all of you to reply to that. Can you please? So that I know all of you are able to use it correctly. Great. Got a message from Divya, Apurva, Pankaj, Manav, Pavleen. Great. Wonderful. A lot of you. That's great. Very nice. Very good. Wonderful. That's great. So please feel free and use the chat today for interaction so that it becomes easier for me to get to your questions and also answer them. And while using the chat, just use it for everyone. Right? So when you're sending a message, just send to everyone and not just to me, so that if there are any questions that the others also have, they'll be able to read the same question and I'll be able to answer everyone's questions. Right. Hello, good morning then to all of you as well. Right. So that's one important thing. The second is your videos need to be switched off. And this is something that we're going to do throughout the batch. Right. This is just to ensure that everyone gets the same bandwidth and there's no problem with networks for everyone. My video will be switched on throughout. So don't worry. Your videos need to be switched off. Right. And just one more thing, obviously, there is also a raise hand feature in Zoom. So not today, but in our classes, in our regular classes later on, you can all use that feature if you have any questions. So I'll let you unmute and you can ask, not today, later, right? Today, we're just going to use the chat and keeping our video switched off. Cool. Can we start with the IELTS then? Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Oh yes, one more important thing. I just got reminded of that. Thank you. So I would just like all of you to rename yourselves, please. Write your first name or your first name and last name as the username, because then I can answer your questions correctly. I can see that most of you have renamed yourselves, which is great. There are only some who have not. So just in case you have a question, I'll not be able to then address you if your names are not visible to me. So there's one user with Redmi K20 Pro. So I need you to please rename yourself. Another user was there with Vivo 1909. So if you can rename yourself as well. And I think, yeah, the rest of you have renamed yourselves for now. That's great. Wonderful. So just these two people, if you can please rename yourselves, that would be great. Yeah. There is an option where you can rename yourselves as well, or you can just tell me your names and I will rename you. It's not a problem. Yeah, just check your name and you'll see that there's one Redmi. Yes, now it's not there, I guess. No, there's still there, Redmi K20 Pro, and there's one Vivo 1909. So I just want both of you to rename, please. Right, that would be better. Okay, so let's start with the IELTS then, and without wasting much time, I would like to address this. So the purpose of today's class obviously is to ensure that all of you get a clear understanding of this test, right? We're looking at what this test is all about. We'll also look at what we are going to cover in these classes. And I'll also share a few things about the test. I'll try and clear a few misconceptions regarding the test. And it's going to be an interactive class, so I would like all of you to use that chat box frequently today, right? So let's start with the term itself. IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System, right? So I want all of you to focus on the first I, that stands for international, and the last S, which stands for system. So it's international, right? We'll look at that as well. Why is it international and why that's an important word? But most important, it's a testing system. It's not an exam. It's a systematic way of assessing your language. So we'll also see why this system has to be approached differently and why we cannot just think of it as an exam and go for it, right? So I'll cover that as well. So let's start then. So as we saw, IELTS stands for International English Language Testing System, right? Now, this is a test which can open doors to higher education or various profession as well as migration. So number of purposes there for which people choose the IELTS. Now, this is a very interesting statistic that you have here. This is world's #1 English language proficiency test. So this is not a marketing gimmick or something, right? When a person from a non-native English speaking country wants to go abroad, either for study or for immigration, he or she will have to prove that he's a good user of the English language. And that is where they have to appear for English language proficiency tests. So currently, if you think of the current scenario, there are 4 very popular English language proficiency tests. There are actually a number of them, but 4 are very popular. One is obviously the IELTS, right? The other, which some of you may have heard about, is called the TOEFL. Have you heard about the TOEFL test? Anyone? TOEFL, test of English as a foreign language. Yes, great. Yeah, GRE is there, but that's an aptitude test, not a language assessment, right? So TOEFL is one. The other one is PTE, that's Pearson Test of English. Have you heard of this? PTE? Yes, some of you have. That's great. Some of you have not. That's also fine, right? And the last one, number 4, is called Duolingo English Test. So have you heard of this one? Duolingo English Test. It's a bit of a new test which has come into the market like in a couple of years back, recent times, right? So there are 4 options that you have. All the tests are, essentially English language tests, which you need to prove, which you need in order to prove your, familiarity with English. So out of these 4 or out of all the other tests that you have, this is number 1, and I'll tell you why as well. So the first reason is because the scores of the IELTS are accepted by, there's a correction here, more than 11,000 organizations now. Not 10,000, but 11,000, more than 11,000 organizations across 140 countries. So all these other tests which I spoke about, either it's like their score acceptance is a bit limited or too specific, or they do not meet the criteria or requirements of immigration authorities at times. So with IELTS, you can submit the scores for immigration purposes. You can also submit the scores for admission purposes. So they're accepted by all these organizations, be it educational or immigration, more than 11,000 such organizations in 140 countries. And that is the reason why in the last year, more than 3 million IELTS tests were administered across the globe. No other test has this number, right? Okay. Let me just check. Real me. That's the problem, when people don't rename, I just don't know what their names are. Real me. Just give me 1 minute, please, everyone. I'll just see what the problem is. Okay. So yes, there's Arman and Realme X2. Okay, fine. Okay. Just give me 1 minute, please, everyone. That should help. Or maybe they're using this is not using a laptop, obviously. Right, let's see, maybe that will help. So this is what we are looking at, and that's why IELTS is world's #1 when it comes to language proficiency tests. Right, now when we are talking about the IELTS, I always like to start this by talking about the two institutions which are really very important. Actually there are three, but now obviously, because if you're looking at just the Indian perspective, we have only two. The first and the most important obviously is Cambridge English Language Assessment. So I'm sure all of you have heard about University of Cambridge. Yes, all of you know that University of Cambridge. Yeah, very popular, one of the topmost universities around the world, right? So this is basically just a department in the University of Cambridge, right? It's a department, and this is a language assessment department. So what is their job? Their job is to prepare the IELTS exam itself, right? They design the curriculum, the syllabus, and also the test papers for the IELTS at Cambridge, right? They also evaluate your performance of the IELTS, right? So they are the people who will give you the scores. So they set the exam papers. They also check your scores. Their job is also to print the official study material for the IELTS. Now, because IELTS is such a popular test, you'll find a lot of material online, lots and lots of websites and so many applications on iPhone and Android, and so many YouTube channels and blogs and whatnot. But only Cambridge material is considered the authentic material, because they are the people who set the examination. So whatever they give for practice is the most realistic. So even if you enroll for this class or no, it doesn't matter, but because you're attending this class as a Cambridge certified IELTS trainer, it is my job to tell you that whenever you're practicing for the IELTS, please make sure that you're practicing through Cambridge material only, because that is the most authentic material that you'll get, right? So the third job is they print and prepare the official practice material as well. The fourth job is that they also train examiners of the IELTS. So people who evaluate your performance of speaking and writing, they are also certified by Cambridge. And people like me, that's their fifth job, trainers of the IELTS. Cambridge also certifies trainers, right? So a lot of things that they do in that particular department there. Yeah. One more institution or body that we must know about is known as IDP IELTS Australia. Right. So one thing that Cambridge does not do is that they do not conduct the IELTS test. They do all the other things, but when you want to appear for the IELTS, you can't go to Cambridge. You have to then appear through IDP IELTS. So IDP is a test conducting body in India, right? All around the world, you also have the British Council. British Council also conducts the examination in some parts of the world, but in India, it is only through IDP. So when you want to book a date for your IELTS exam, you need to go to this website, the IDP website, and you can book through it, right? So these are the specific functions performed by these two institutions, right? So let's talk about the structure of the exam itself now. Yeah, so the exam is offered both on paper and on computer, right? You can choose which one you want to, right? Paper and pencil based, that is called the PB, right? Paper based IELTS, and it is also CD, that is computer delivered IELTS. When you book your exam day, that is when you get a chance to decide which one you want to register for. You can go for the paper IELTS, you can also go for the computer delivered. I will tell you later which one I will prefer and why, right? I have a strong preference. I'll tell you which one and why just a bit later, right? So there are two types of IELTS then, right? IELTS academic and IELTS general training. So we just saw in the previous slide that people can use IELTS for studies and they can also use it for migrating. So if you're a student and if you want to pursue a bachelor's or a master's course abroad, then you must book IELTS academic exam. Yeah, could be bachelor's, master's, for some PhDs as well, certificate courses as well. If you want to go for a postgraduate diploma or a certificate course, you go through IELTS academic mostly, right? General training is required for PR, that is permanent residency. So if you want to go to a country and directly start working there and settle down, that is where you'll have to appear for IELTS general training. So I just want to know how many of you are targeting IELTS general training? Just those who are targeting general training. How many? You just write in the chat box if you are. Manjeet, Apurva, Vishal, Kushi, okay. Just IELTS general training, right? Pooja as well, okay. Fine. Because then while explaining, I will also go through the general training. UKVI, okay. So that is also fine. No, Kushi, no. All right, fine. So Pavleen as well, okay. A lot of things, a lot of people here who are targeting GT. All right. I'll also then give you a brief of that exam later in terms of the structure of the test, right? Now, the duration of the test, no matter which version you go for, you can go for IELTS Academic or IELTS General Training. Your exam is approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes long, right? And it tests 4 different abilities: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Yeah, because it's a language test, remember. So in a language, you have these 4 skills which you must determine. So it's going to ensure that you get your desired score in all those 4 skills. And if the score accepting body is satisfied, they allow you to enter the country, right? So let's take a detailed look at the IELTS now, right? So we just looked at this International English Language Testing System. It is conducted in India by IDP Education Australia. This is their website, IELTSIDPindia.com. So if you want to go to that website and find out more about the IDP or about the IELTS, you can definitely do so, right? Your scores remain valid for 2 years. Now, this is a very important point here. So this 2 years is not from the date of your result. This 2 years is from the date of your exam, right? Because you get your result a certain days after your exam. So for pen and paper IELTS, if you want to write this on a pen and paper, your results are announced 13 days, 13 days after your test. But for a computer delivered IELTS, your results come out in just 5 days after your test. Yeah, but the score is valid from the date of your exam. Remember that, 2 years from the date of the test, right? So if I've taken the test on say 15th of March 2022, my scores are going to be valid till 14th of March 2024. Yeah, 2 years from the date of test. So you get your scores in bands here. There are a total of 9 bands in every module, and also a total score which is calculated out of 9 bands. And we'll talk a bit later about this as well in detail. So because it's a system, it's a testing system, you don't get marks out of 100 or marks out of 50. They give you a band score. There has been a bit of a revision in exam fee of the IELTS just yesterday, right? So starting yesterday, if you want to book for a test day now, it's going to be 15,500 rupees, and you have to book your test through this website, IELTSIDPindia.com, right? This used to be 14,700 just till Saturday. They just revised these, fees yesterday, starting yesterday. Yeah. The mode of payment, then you can pay this fee using a credit or debit card, given that it's a Visa or a MasterCard, right? You will not be able to use a RuPay card on this website, because although this is India, you can see that IELTSIDPindia.com. It's an Indian website, and this is an Indian amount or Indian currency. The transaction itself is considered as an international transaction because this is an Australian organization after all. And therefore, your RuPay cards will not work. So Visa or Master, or you can visit the nearby ICICI branch and you can fill out a challan or DD from there. Or you can also use the UPI interface, which is powered by Paytm here, but you can use any other UPI IDs if you have them, right? So that is also possible. Like I said, the test duration is usually 2 hours and 45 minutes. When is the exam going to take place? That's up to you, Kabir. You can go to the website, IELTSIDPindia.com, and you can see the test dates, right? You have to choose a center, you know, the city where you would like to appear from. City-wise, they have listed all the dates for the IELTS test. Okay, here we are just going to prepare for the test. We are not going to conduct your test here. It's just a class where you learn the tricks. You finally have to appear with the IDP. Okay. I hope that answers it. So there are a number of different dates available every month. More detail about UKVI, sure, I will. Don't worry, I will. Yeah. So there are 50 plus testing centers across India. These are, I think, located in more than 35, more than 40 cities in India. Some cities have double twin centers as well. The bigger cities, metro cities will have twin centers too. But in a lot of cities, there are just one, there's just one center that is. So you can definitely then think of that. Now, UKVI IELTS is exactly the same as IELTS academic. Okay. IELTS, there's no UKVI general. I've never heard of UKVI general if it's there. Usually UKVI academic is the only thing that I've, when UKVI, there's IELTS UKVI. There's no academic or general usually attached to it. So IELTS UKVI is exactly the same test as IELTS academic. There's no difference really. Yeah. So IELTS UKVI is IELTS academic. Just another name. And there are just a couple of things that you'll have to consider, but it's IELTS academic essentially. No, nothing different, right? So let's then talk a bit about the class structure and how we're going to conduct this batch, right? So we're going to offer you a total of 25 classes in the batch, out of which 23 classes would be used for teaching purposes, where we'll look at the IELTS, we'll practice with the modules covered in the test and all of that. The 2 classes which are left would be used for full-length mock tests. There would be 2 mock tests, right? So these 2 mock tests would be conducted in this way. The first mock test would be conducted at around 50% course completion. Once we're around 50% done, we'll conduct the first mock, and then the second mock would be conducted towards the end of the test. Okay. Yeah, Khushi, I'll tell you that as well. Don't worry. Like I said, that I have a very strong preference for paper and computer. So I'll tell you which one and why I think that is better. Don't worry, I'll give you that answer very soon. Yeah, so this is how the mock tests would be conducted. Obviously, our focus is going to be on Cambridge IELTS book. So once you enroll for these classes, you'll get access to all the PDFs and MP3s that come from Cambridge. So there are 16 books, 16 books that Cambridge has published so far. And after your enrollment, you get an access to all those 16 books in PDF format, and the MP3 files for the listening section as well. But in the class, we're going to focus mostly on IELTS number 12 and number 14. These are book numbers, more like edition of a book. So edition 12 and 14. This is because these 2 books cover the most number of question types in almost every section. They also cover a wider range of accents, and they give you a number of different tasks in different difficulty levels as well. So you get exposed to all that you must know about the test through these 2 books. That's why we choose these 2. Yeah. And obviously we'll have enough practice on all the 4 skills that IELTS is going to test. That's listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So we'll have enough practice on all skills. So all of you feel comfortable with the test and we'll be able to approach it in the right manner, right? You just have to choose that you have to go for IELTS general training, Apurva. So when you book your test, you have to create a student account, right? The first page is where you just have to fill out the basic details, your name, your passport details, and things like that. And then you just have to choose a test type. In the test type, they'll give you the options of academic and general training. So you pick general training there, right? So IELTS for UKVI academic. Thank you, Hiren, for that. So this is just the same test basically, right? So general, okay, fine. So there's your answer. Thank you for that, right? So IELTS general training then is exactly the same as well as UKVI general training, as I can see from that description. There's nothing different to that. Yeah, so don't worry, right? And one more thing that we are talking about here for UKVI as well, it's exactly the same. Yeah. So one more thing, because we're talking about the class structure here, that is, these classes are for IELTS academic students. For general training, either UKVI or just IELTS general training, we will have 2 additional classes for all of you, just for the general training IELTS exam, because our class is going to be focused on all the skills for everyone. All these 25 classes are common for IELTS academic and general training students. But then there are only a few aspects which are a bit different in general training. So those different aspects, we'll be focusing on them in these 2 additional classes, which will be conducted at the end of the second mock test, after the second mock. Okay. No, there's no only general specific batch, Apurva, because like I said, that you'll see that as well later, that 85% of the syllabus is exactly the same, right? I wouldn't say even 15% is different, but just for the sake of it, I would say around 12% of the syllabus is different. And therefore you get to learn a lot of skills together, no matter what your test type is, right? Now, let's look at the test itself then and see how this test, or how is this a system, not an exam, but it's a testing system. So we'll look at that as well, right? Okay, for speaking skills, we'll have individual practice. Pooja, that's a good question. So for speaking, because IELTS speaking test is conducted in a one-on-one basis, right? So we're never going to do group discussions here in the class, or I'm never going to ask you to speak in front of everyone. We're going to have just a one-on-one interaction like you have in the IELTS using the breakout rooms. Yeah, there is a feature in Zoom which is called breakout rooms, and that is how we'll practice. Okay, so let's look at the test then. So all the candidates who appear for the test, be it academic, be it general training, be it paper-based, be it computer delivered, all of you would be tested in listening, reading, writing, and speaking. That is the given. Yeah. Now your test will usually start with the listening section, always, not usually, it'll always start with the listening section, which lasts for about 30 minutes. This is a section with headphones. You get your individual headphones and some audios are played for you, and you have to write the answers to those audios in 30 minutes, right? This is a simultaneous process. So you can't pause the audio, you can't rewind the audio. Once the audio is being played, you have to listen to the audio, to read the questions at the same time, evaluate the answer and write it down. Yeah, all the skills are going to be used at the same time, simultaneously. I'll talk a bit more about it later, don't worry. Immediately after the listening, you get your reading test. And the reading test is a 1-hour test, 60-minute test, right? And there are a few differences in the academic and general training reading test, which I will talk about a bit later. But the time remains exactly the same. The listening section is exactly the same for everyone. The same audios, the same time, the same questions, nothing changes. Yeah. Immediately after that, you get the writing test, which is again a longer test of 60 minutes, right? There are 2 questions in the writing test, and you have to write the answers to both the questions in these 60 minutes, right? So I'm saying that the total duration here is about 2 hours and 45 minutes. Right from the start, I've been telling you this. But if you do a quick math, you'd see that it's 2 hours and 30 minutes. So any idea where these extra 15 minutes come from? And they don't come from speaking. I'm not counting the speaking here. I'm just counting the 3 sections and I'm saying it's 2 hours, 45 minutes. Any ideas where the extra 15 minutes are coming from? From listening. Yeah, checking answers. Okay, good. Paperwork, break. Okay, breaks in between. Fine. So one thing, let me make it very clear for all of you. There are no breaks in between, right? Listening, reading, and writing. It just is like it's like an express train. There's no break in between. It just goes on and on and on, right? So there are no breaks. What happens is, now this is where I would like to answer that question, which is better, pen and paper or computer delivered? So if you're taking the pen and paper IELTS, so you're listening to the audio, you're looking at the questions and you're writing your answers at the same time. So the expectation is that you should write your answers on the question booklet itself. There's a question booklet and there's the answer sheet. They want you to write all your answers on this question booklet. At the end of the last audio, they give you 10 minutes additional time where you can transfer everything from the question booklet to the answer sheet, right? 10 minutes, that's good enough. Yes, and that is where 10 additional minutes come from. For the computer delivered IELTS, you have to type your answers. You don't have to write them down. You're typing your answers, and once you type your answers, they automatically go to the answer area. You don't have to do anything. So they just give you 2 minutes here to check your answers if there are any spelling mistakes that you've made or some other issues that you have, right? Just 2 minutes. Pen and paper, you get 10, which is a huge advantage. Also in the pen and paper IELTS, you can underline words in your questions. You cannot do that on the computer delivered IELTS, sadly. Yeah, so that's why my first reason to prefer pen and paper. Right now, in the reading section as well, you are able to underline whatever you want to in the passages and also in the questions. Computer delivered IELTS gives you the option to highlight text in the passage. That is something you can do. You have to select the text, then you have to right click, a pop-up comes in where you can choose highlight and the text gets highlighted. But then again, you can't really do that for the questions. See, in the IELTS, the words in the questions are equally important as well. Right? So yes, good typing speed. Obviously, if you want to go for computer delivered IELTS, good typing skill is speed is a must. You have to have that. Right? So the reading section, again, you can't really highlight words in the questions, and that's a bit of a drawback if you ask me. And that's again why I would definitely tilt towards the pen and paper IELTS. For the writing section, obviously, the computer delivered has two big advantages. First advantage is that they give you a word counter. So you automatically know how many words you've typed. In the pen and paper IELTS, well, there is a very simple formula for that. I'll tell you about that. But you have to take care of the word count yourself, right? The second thing is that if you suddenly change your mind or suddenly a new idea comes into your mind, in the computer delivered IELTS, you just have to click on that particular spot and type, and your new sentence gets inserted. But for the pen and paper, you have to erase everything, and then you have to write the new sentence, and then you have to write the older sentences again. It's a bit of a painstaking task that way. But again, there is a solution to that. And that is what we are also going to cover in the classes. If you plan properly, see, planning is a very important skill. If you plan properly, you wouldn't then have to change your answers a lot, right? So I would definitely, there's no word counter. Handwriting is not a huge issue in the IELTS writing section. I'm sure all of you have taken paper-based tests all your life, starting from school and going all through universities. All of you have done a lot of writing. So you're all familiar with that. And I'm sure your handwriting is not that bad that only you can read it, right? If it's in that category, then there's going to be a bit of a problem. All they look for is your words to be readable. If your words are readable, if as a third person, if I've never seen your writing in my life ever, and you give me something in writing, and if I am able to read all the words that you've written, good enough. I don't want you to use the textbook font or this kind of style or that. Doesn't matter really. So I would definitely consider pen and paper IELTS to be more beneficial. But then if I have deadlines, if I want my results faster, if I am still stressed a bit about the writing part, I might go for computer delivered, right? But my preference is always going to be pen and paper. Yeah. So your test follows this same structure, listening, reading, and writing on the same day at the same venue. Yeah, you're informed about your testing day and testing venue 2 to 3 days or 4 days before your exam. So you have to go to that particular venue, and this same order is followed in all the countries, in all the test centers. That is why it is international. It follows the same thing everywhere, right? For your speaking test, this depends from center to center. You might have to go on a different day, on a different time, at a different venue, right? Or it could be at the same venue at a later time than your LRW. It depends on testing center and the availability of slots. So the speaking section is a one-on-one interaction between you and the examiner, where it lasts for minimum of 11 and a maximum of 14 minutes. Yeah, so that's the nature of the speaking section, right? Mostly nowadays they've started doing this online, so it happens over a Zoom call or a Skype call. They've really reduced the number of in-person interactions for speaking, and that is how we are also going to practice the speaking section in the class. You'll have this overall virtual interaction with me where we can then hone your skills and look for corrections as well, right? So let's talk about the test in detail now. Let's start with the listening module, right? So the time that you get here is 30 minutes, obviously. There are 4 parts. That means there are 4 audios and there are 40 questions, right? So every audio has 10 questions associated with it. Audio 1 has 10, audio 2 has 10, 3 has 10, 4 has 10, 40, right? These are real world listening situations. So they're not specifically recorded for your testing day. right? They try and keep it as realistic as possible because they want to know when you go to those English speaking countries, will you be able to survive in the atmosphere around you? So that is what they're trying to check here, and therefore they try and keep it as realistic as possible. There are a number of different topics and tasks involved here as well. Some audios may want you to look for specifics like dates and places and names and numbers and so on. Some audios might want you to look at the gist or the overall theme or the background of the audio. Why is this conversation taking place? What are the main aspects of the conversation or dialogue, right? Some audios would also ask you to focus on the attitude or the opinion of the speakers. So if you're listening to their tone closely, you would know what their attitude is. You would know whether they're happy or they're sad or they're complaining or they're praising something. You know that, right? Getting to their opinion could be a bit tricky sometimes, where you'll have to listen very closely to the kind of words that they're using, the language, the overall language that they're using, whether they agree or they disagree, or, you know, whatever else they're coming up with, they're partially agreeing with things, right? So you'll have to be a bit more careful with these opinion-based questions. Yeah, so let's look at the test format itself. So the first audio, part 1, is a conversation always, and it's a conversation between two speakers, right? So this is a very general day-to-day conversation where two people are interacting in a social context. So maybe I am calling a hotel and I am asking if they have a facility of a conference room that I would like to book for my office get-together, right? Or you know, I am maybe calling a service person. Maybe let's say my refrigerator is broken down. I am calling this company which provides a service, and I am asking if their technician can come to my home and look at it. It's very basic, very general, right? Always between two speakers, and then 10 questions are associated with it. Then you have the second part, which is a monologue. So the meaning of mono is one. Log means it is scripted. So it is a scripted speech, basically. One person delivers this speech. And this again uses a very general social context, right? Here a speaker might be, maybe you'll hear the mayor of a town addressing the audience and talking about some new facilities that he has planned for the town, or some new facilities that he's about to inaugurate. This could also be a radio talk where one person is talking entirely about things that he would like you to know. Right? So it could be that. It could be a tour guide who is talking to a lot of tourists and telling them a lot of information about a historical site, and you know, telling them where they can see what exactly. It could be that. Again, very, very general in nature. Right? The next audio is a bit tricky. This is actually where the listening section becomes challenging. Right? So this is also a conversation, but you may have up to 4 speakers here. Right? So if there are only 2 speakers, it would definitely be a conversation. But if there are 3 or 4 speakers, then this would become a discussion. So it could be a conversation, it could be a discussion, and this is purely academic in nature. By academic, I mean this is a university campus situation where 2 students are interacting with each other and they're talking about a project that they have to maybe complete, right? Or a research paper that they have to finish, or maybe a professor and a student. They're discussing among themselves maybe some doubts that the student has. So this is purely based on a university campus situation, right? Could be a conversation, could be a discussion, depends on the number of speakers that you get. There could be up to 4, never more than 4, never less than 2, minimum 2, maximum 4. And finally, in the last audio, you will hear a lecture. Again, just one person talking here. So this professor or the lecturer will enter the classroom, right? And he or she will start talking about a very specific topic in detail. But the beauty of the IELTS is that you do not need to have any background information about the topic, right? All you need to do is to just look at the text which is given to you on the paper. That's the text of the lecture. And you have to listen to the audio and then fetch your answers from the audio itself. So all that you need is there in the audio, and you just have to focus on the words that they've used, right? So the duration of each part is roughly, that's a good question as well, Pooja, roughly 7 to 8 minutes, right? 8 minutes is the maximum. Usually it's around 7.5 minutes per audio, right? And as all of you already know that every audio will have 10 questions associated with it. These arrows, they tell you that every next part is more difficult than the previous one. In simple words, part 1 is the easiest audio, part 4 is the most difficult. Yeah, so the difficulty level will go on increasing as you progress through the listening test, right? So these are your 4 audios and the types. Now this is exactly the same for everyone. Same for general training, same for academic. All of you listen to the same audios. You're sitting at in the same examination hall. You get the same question paper for the listening as well, right? Nothing changes. Okay, right. So there are a few things that you must remember, right? First is that every audio is played just one time. So if you miss out on something, it's gone. It's never coming back. You don't have any controls in your hand. You cannot pause the recording. You cannot rewind the audio, nothing at all. The only thing that you can control is the volume. You have a volume dial there. So you can increase the volume or decrease the volume, but you can't do much about that, right? Therefore, it's very important to read the questions carefully before listening. Now, there are 2 words that I've highlighted here, carefully and before. I'll talk about before first. So what they do is before the audio starts, they give you some time, roughly 30 seconds, 30 seconds to look at all the questions. This helps you to at least get a rough idea of what this audio is going to be all about, right? So this before has to be utilized carefully. The 30 seconds that you get, if you're thinking of the last audio and some answers that you've forgotten or you're not very sure about, this entire audio is then going to be a surprise for you. So don't do that. Use this time very carefully. Try and read the questions. Try and maybe mark a few details that you would like to focus on while the audio is playing. So that is going to help you a lot. Yeah. And obviously this is my job, but you have to be familiar with all the different question types that you come across in the listening section. I'll ensure that all of you are familiar with all the different question types by the end of the batch. So these are some common question types. Completing a chart. Well, they'll give you a flow chart just like this, and some words would be blanked out. Yeah. So you listen to the audio and then you just write the words which are missing or the gaps which are there. So then you might also get a question where a map is given to you and you navigate through the map. You go here and there and east and west and north and south, and the speaker will tell you all the sites which are there in the map. You just have to usually label the map. So we'll have a practice on that as well. Don't worry. Right. Obviously, there are a lot of note-taking exercises, mostly for the first and the 4th audio. The first conversation and the 4th lecture will have a lot of note-taking exercises for them. You also have multiple choice questions too, MCQs, which are very common. And there are some more other question types too. So don't worry, these are just a few common ones. We'll look at all the question types once we go to the practice sections from tomorrow itself. Right. So before we move on to the reading, there's just one more thing which I would like to talk about here. So a lot of my students, they are like, what kind of accents are we going to listen to? Right. So because it's an international test, so the accents that they will try and cover would be UK accents, US accents, Australian accents, and New Zealand accents. Those are the most important ones. Right. Apart from these accents, obviously, you might sometimes also hear the South African accent as well. It's rare, but there is a possibility of this coming in. Mostly they focus on the top 4, UK, US, Australia, New Zealand. Right. Now, this begs a question. They're like, my students are like, sir, so if they're going to test us in these accents, we'll just watch web series and English movies and we'll listen to songs. All of this is okay, but not that great for the IELTS because you just end up entertaining yourself through web series and movies and songs. You don't end up learning language, which is the aim here, right? So for the listening section, when it comes to the listening section, I would like to recommend a few resources where you can actually go and practice from. So I'm sure all of you have heard of TED Talks. Yes, no? Yes. So TED Talks is a great resource because again, you would not be that interested in the video when you're listening to a TED Talk. Yeah, you would be more interested in the kind of language that the speaker is using. So definitely go for TED Talks, right? You can also go for a number of different podcasts. Do you know what are podcasts? Yes, that's nice. only one answer, I think. No, now I have a few. That's cool. All right, that's great. So you can listen to a number of different podcasts on a number of different topics as well, right? So for podcasts, especially for the IELTS, I would recommend that you can go to ABC. This is Australian broadcasting company or something like that. This is an Australian radio service, basically. ABC has wonderful broadcasts. You can also go to RNZ, which is Radio New Zealand, right? These are two wonderful websites where you'll find a lot of good podcasts to listen to, which are very generic in nature as well. Yeah, so these would be some go-to resources or websites that you can listen to. Yeah, I'll be sharing a number of different other resources as well when we start with the listening section. Yeah, so are there any doubts related to listening before we begin with the reading section? Anyone? All of you get your individual headphone. You get time to check the headphones, whether they're working or no. You get to change the headphones if there are any problems. So enough time is given to all of you. Yeah. So let's start with the reading then. Now, this is a longer test and there are some differences here in terms of IELTS academic and IELTS general training. So I'll also tell you all about that. So here you have 3 reading passages and the number of questions is still 40. For IELTS academic test, for all the students here who want to pursue further education, you get 3 long passages and there are 40 questions on all 3 passages combined. So usually it's like 13, 13, 14, right? The first 2 passages have 13 questions each. The last passage has 14 questions. So that makes up for 40. For IELTS general training, you have 3 reading sections, not passages, 3 sections in which you have 5 texts. So there are, in the first section, you have 2 short texts, right? In the second section, again, you have 2 short texts. In the third section, you get this 1 long passage. So 5 texts. Overall, all of you, no matter which test you go for, you read or end up reading about 3,200 words combined. Yeah, that's the average length of the IELTS reading test. 3,200 words. In the 60 minutes, you have to read all of that. You have to read the instructions. You have to read the questions. You have to understand the questions. You have to understand the passage. You have to find the answer and you have to write the answer in the answer sheet in these 60 minutes. No additional time is given to you here. And that is obviously why time is your biggest enemy in the reading section. So what can help you? Something that can help you is to know where these texts come from and get a bit of an idea as to what language or vocabulary they use, right? So they're taken from books or magazines or journals and newspapers. I think we can start with newspapers first, right? So any good newspapers that you would like to recommend here? Anyone? Any newspapers which are known for their language? Economic Times, fine. Manav, yes. BBC is also a news website, Harleen, which can be used. Times of India, there we go. Yes, that's a good one. Economic Times as well. I mean, something that I would definitely want some of you to read at least. Any other good newspapers? What about the Indian Express? Have you? Yes, there we go. Now I can see that from one of them, one of you. Express is there. The Hindu, obviously, right? Hindustan Times as well, right? That's a good one. All of these. Deccan Chronicles, if some of you have read that, if you know about it, good newspapers. Obviously, the Hindu is something that I would like to single out because the language in the Hindu is very high level. The Pioneer is great, Kabir. Yes. So it is very high level. So I would not like all of you to start directly with the Hindu because it can just bamboozle you, as they say, right? So maybe you can start with the Times of India or you can start with an Indian Express and then slowly and steadily build up towards the Hindu, which is fine. And all of these are good newspapers, but when it comes to the IELTS, you may not find the vocabulary that you're looking for in these newspapers. So the ones that I would like to recommend would be these ones. So I'm sure all of you have heard of this. Yes. NYT. I'm hoping you have. Yeah, right. So New York Times is great. The other one that I would like to recommend is maybe you have also heard of this. Have you? Washington Post. This is also one of the good newspapers that in terms of vocab is concerned, this is good. So Washington Post obviously is also good. You can also go for the Guardian. Guardian is also a good newspaper based out of US. So if you want to go for newspapers, you can refer these three. And all of them have their own websites. You may not find them in India in a form of a newspaper. It may not be available, right? If your local newspaper guy can provide you with an edition, it's okay. But online, yes, they're all available online. It would be easier to read online, right? For all these three. If you want to go for a few websites, so if you are saying that you want some news websites to go through, so here I would definitely recommend BBC World, not BBC English. If you go to BBC English, it takes you only to the UK edition of the website, which is a bit limited. If you go to BBC World, you get a wider perspective there. Also, the same thing with CNN. You should go for the global edition. Their website has this global edition, the US edition as well. Don't go for the US. That's again very specific. You need to read the global edition. Okay, so BBC and CNN are wonderful. If you want to maybe mix and match a bit of listening and reading together, right? So another wonderful website is this one. Have you heard of this? Al Jazeera? Anyone? Any idea? Maybe some of you have. That's great. Wonderful. Right. So they also have a YouTube channel, Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera, I'll recommend Al Jazeera because in their panel interviews, they have a range of different nationalities coming together. So you might find a man from UK, let's say, debating with a man from New Zealand. So you get both the accents at the same time, which is great. And obviously their written articles are also good in terms of your vocabulary needs. So they're nice. So these would be some newspapers and websites that I would want all of you to try and go through at least, let's say, one article a day to start with would be good enough, right? If we talk about magazines then, because magazines is also obviously, an area where you can focus on. So all of you have heard of Time, I'm sure. Yes. Time is one of the most popular magazines around the world, right? Have you heard of this? What is this? Where can we get academic reading? In these newspapers itself, Kirin. Right? WSJ? No? Okay. So this is, now some of you would know what this is. I've heard of this. Yes, right? So Wall Street Journal is also wonderful in terms of magazines that you want to go for. Yeah, but one of the best magazines that you can read is actually National Geographic. All of you know the channel, right? They also have a magazine that they produce or publish. So if you can go to the National Geographic magazine, this is one of the best magazines for the IELTS. Yeah, and again, all of these are also available online. So you don't need to purchase anything or buy a subscription to anything. Don't do those things. Not really. If you're clever enough, you'll be able to get these things online. Yeah. So these would be the things that I would like to focus. I would like you all to focus on to start with. This is going to kickstart your preparation in the right way, right? So the vocabulary that you need or the language that you need, you get the familiarity that you want. Right. I'm not really going to talk specifically about books because these are books which are a part of curriculum for a lot of universities and colleges in the first or the second year's bachelor courses. So there could be a lot of different authors and a lot of different streams to talk about. But you read these magazines and newspapers that we've spoken about, they're good enough. In terms of journals, sadly, we don't have a lot of journals to talk about in India. But one which comes to my mind, which also does a good job, is the Reader's Digest. Have you all heard of that? I'll just type it in the chat box. Maybe some of you have already heard of it. Yes, this is it. Reader's Digest. Yeah, you can definitely go for that as well if you want to. But then again, if you cover the magazines and newspapers that I've already shared, you don't then have to separately go for the Reader's Digest. Yeah, it's almost there. right? So the next thing is then obviously to again be familiar with question types. Here as well, you get questions where you have to find detailed information from somewhere. So you have to read a passage very carefully, clearly, specifically, and find that information. Sometimes you also have questions where you have to identify the views of the author. And this is not as simple as it was in the listening. You listen to the tone of the list of the speaker and you know what he or she is saying. Here, no author will directly say, I agree with this or I support this idea. No, they'll give you views in a very subtle manner, and that needs a lot of digging up. So we'll also learn how to do that. But there are questions on this, right? There are also questions on completing a chart or a diagram or a process, which is one of the easier question types. And you should not have a lot of problem with this. And there are some MCQs as well, multiple choice questions that come up here too. And there are a number of other question types, which we will be looking at once we start solving the reading passages here in the class, right? Now, like I said, that the time is the biggest challenge for all of you, and then the vocabulary or language. Yeah. Therefore, it's very important to be familiar with skimming and scanning. These two strategies are recommended by Cambridge. They're almost designed by Cambridge, you can see, right? They're recommended by Cambridge, British Council, and IDP. And being a Cambridge certified trainer, I'll be teaching you the Cambridge version of skimming and scanning here in this batch, right? So have you heard of skimming and scanning before? Anyone? Or maybe you've used them to a certain extent? Yes, that's good. Just one yes. No. No is a better answer actually. But then some of you said yes, which is fine, because these yeses, you might have to forget everything about skimming and scanning that you already know. So I always tell all my students that IELTS is all about unlearn and relearn. Unlearn is when you forget things that you've learned on purpose. Relearn, so you start learning them again. So if your answer is no, it's actually a good answer, because then you'll be starting right at the basic. Yeah. For the people who said yes, again, it's going to be a bit challenging, just a little bit, but I'm sure you'd like this version better than the one that you already know, because this is an improvised version of skimming and scanning, right? So that then takes us to the writing section. Now, one thing which I would like to highlight here is that for the listening and the reading, the two sections that we've already covered, there is no negative marking. So if you get an answer correct, they give you 1 point. If you get an answer incorrect, they'll give you a 0. There's no -1. And a lot of students don't know this, but there is negative marking in writing and speaking. The next two sections that we are going to cover, writing and speaking, both carry negative marking. And a lot of students just don't know this, right? So they just appear for this test blindly and they're like, yeah, fine, I think I've done well. And suddenly then they get a 5 band score and they're like, why did I get a 5? You got a 5 because you didn't know what not to do. Right? A lot of people will tell you, oh, you should do this and you should do that. But when we start with the writing section, the first thing that I'm going to highlight is what you should not do in the IELTS if you don't want to go into that negative marking space, right? So let's talk about writing then. This is a longer test with 60 minutes and 2 questions. We call them tasks, right? So the first task here, you should approximately spend 20 minutes on this, and you have to write a minimum of 150 words. So this is the minimum. If you fall short of this, obviously there's negative marking. Now, if you're appearing for IELTS Academic, they give you a graph or a table or a pie chart or a line graph, things like that. And you have to convert that into a descriptive report, an academic report based on a table or an infographic. But if you're appearing for IELTS General Training, you have no graphs, no tables, no nothing. They give you a situation and you have to write a 150 words letter on that situation. It could be a formal letter, informal letter, or it could also be a semi-formal letter. Yes, negative marking for both the questions here, right? So that is what the difference here is. So 150 words is the same, 20 minutes also the same. For academic, it is a report. For general training, it is a letter, right? So we'll also have a specific discussion on that. Sure, no problem. And then the second question is exactly the same for everyone, no matter what you appear for, again, general training or the academic test. You have to write an essay here, which again, you have to produce in minimum 250 words. There's no maximum. The Cambridge has never, from their end, have never disclosed that, oh, this is the maximum that you're allowed to write. You can write as many words as you want. There's no upper limit. You just have to ensure that you're able to finish both these questions in 60 minutes. That's all, right? So in this question, they give you an opinion or a problem. Opinion. So they would say that increasing fuel costs is an ideal way of reducing pollution. Opinion. So then they'll ask you, do you agree with this? Do you agree with this opinion? And then you have to say, okay, I agree, and these are the reasons. Or you say, no, I don't think this is a good idea, I disagree, and these are my reasons, right? Or sometimes they'll give you a problem, right? They might tell you that, the pandemic has caused a lot of people to be forced out of the formal education system. Problem, right? So what solutions can be found for this? So you have to then analyze the problem and come up with some situations that you feel can address the situation, right? So you have to write a 250 words essay in around 40 minutes. So this is exactly the same for all of you. Only task one is different. So when you're writing this essay, you have to discuss issues, you have to construct an argument, but very important, you have to use the right kind of tone here, the right kind of language, right? Your vocabulary has to be correct. You can't choose words which are informal in nature. You can't come up with grammatical formations which are not accurate. So all of that is also considered. If you don't use the right kind of language, you end up losing marks. Yeah, so that's very important in terms of the writing section. So what you should be doing then, right? Very important to read the question carefully. That's very important. You must understand what the question is. What are the demands of the question? I see so many students doing this silly mistake that they look at the question paper and they just start writing, right? They're like, somebody's running behind them and they must escape the person. They start writing. That's the worst plan to have in the IELTS. You should read the question very carefully, analyze the question, have a plan in your mind, and then only you should start writing. Yeah. So this is again something that all of you can do. You should familiarize yourself with this data in newspapers and textbook. This is for IELTS academic, because writing a report is something that's very new. You may not have done that before in your entire life. So the first time in your life, you're going to write an academic report. So you need to know what kind of language is used in a report, what to do, what not to do. So whichever newspaper you have at your home right now, an English newspaper, I'm sure all of those English newspapers, whichever you're reading, they have a business page. Yes. Have you ever looked at the business page of an English newspaper? No. Sir, we just read the Bollywood. What are you asking about? What is this? Yeah. Oh, you've read. Some of you have. Right. So there's a business page in every newspaper, apart from the Bollywood and sports. Yeah. You go to the business page of the newspaper and you read a few articles from there. Usually you will see some graphs in the business page, right? On the business page rather, and those graphs converted into articles. So you get to know what kind of analysis is required, what kind of language is required. This familiarization is very, very important. So if you're not getting a newspaper, English newspaper at your home, I would recommend that you can, start getting one from the list that we had talked about. Times of India, Indian Express, these would be good. You can go for Economic Times as well if you want to, but Times of India or Indian Express, maybe you can pick one, whichever you feel is easier for you to understand. You pick any one and you start reading that on a regular basis, right? This is very important. And obviously this as well. So practice formulating your own ideas on different topics. So the essay questions that you face on the IELTS, they're not like questions that come from another universe. They come from your own life, basically related to your own life. They might ask you about pollution or population or education or technology. So these are very common topics that they cover. So you just have to come up with your own ideas. If you see, it's very easy. If you have a notebook, if you create a notebook, you write the topic on the top. You say technology. What are your thoughts on technology? You just write your thoughts there. So, okay, I think artificial intelligence is going to be the future. Okay. What are my views about artificial intelligence? I am saying that we are already dependent on machines. Machines are doing everything for us, right? They're cleaning our houses and they're organizing things for us in devices, and they're also, reading books for us now. They're showing us entertainment, whatever else. I'm saying I don't want machines to do thinking for humans as well. Once they start doing that, humans don't start, they don't really remain humans anymore. That's one unique thing that we have, thinking, right? If you're saying artificial intelligence, your machines are also going to be intelligent. They'll be able to come up with a number of different permutations, combinations, and give you a solution to this problem. Well, we might just stop evolving further then. Right? So that's it. You just come up with your own views on these different points. What that will do is, when you go for your test, you'll have a huge advantage over the others. You already have a range of ideas in your mind. So when you start planning for your essay question, you don't start at a zero. You already have written something in that notebook. So you already remember 3 things. So you start with a 4. You don't start at a 0, you start at 3. Right? So that's something you should definitely start doing right from today. Very important. Yeah. And then obviously we go to the speaking section. Again, there is negative marking here. Remember that, right? So this is the shortest format of the test, or shortest section of the test, 10 to 15 minutes. This is a face-to-face interview between you and one examiner. So just one candidate, one examiner. Okay, it's not a group interview where a lot of different people are sitting in a panel and they're interviewing you. It's not Shark Tank, don't worry. Right? Just one examiner and one student. It's not a GD where a lot of students are talking and one person is listening to them. Not really. One candidate, one examiner. That's all. Right? And this is also organized in different sections. So the first part of the speaking test lasts for about 5 minutes. This is called introduction and interview. Right? So here the examiner will ask you very basic questions. They'll ask you your name. And then they'll be like, okay, tell me a bit about your hometown. Tell me a bit about your family. What are you studying currently? Or if you're working, then they might ask you to talk a bit about your work. Very, very general things. The aim is to ensure that you feel safe and secured and your nerves, just settle down a little bit. And then in this interview section also, they'll give you very easy topics and they'll ask your views about a few. So they might ask you about music. Do you like listening to music? What kind of songs do you like to listen to? Things like that. Or weather as well, right? Do you have a favorite season, right? So why do you like the summer, or what things can you do in winter in your country? Very general questions, very simple, easy to answer questions here, right? So the second part is where the challenge begins. This is where it's an individual talk. You also call it the long turn, right? So this is where they give you a topic and some questions related to it. They also give you 1 minute of preparation time. So in that 1 minute, you can write down some ideas. They give you a rough paper and a pencil. You can write down some ideas, and then you have to speak on that topic for 2 minutes. Again, this topic is related to your day-to-day life activities. It's not a test of your knowledge. It is just a test of your language, right? So they might ask you questions like, describe a memorable photograph that you have taken. I'm sure you've taken thousands of pictures, so you can definitely pick one which is really memorable and just talk about it. So they'll give you follow-up questions as well. When did you take this photograph? Where was this photograph taken? Who is there in this photograph? Why is it such a special or memorable photograph? So you can plan accordingly, right? And then in the third part, so this is where the examiner is not going to say anything. In part 2, you are the only one who's speaking. So in the third part, the examiner again starts asking you questions. These are discussion questions. All these questions are related to the topic of your talk in the part 2. So if this was describe a memorable photograph, in the discussion topics, the examiner might ask you general questions related to photography, right? They might ask you, why do you think photography is becoming such common or so popular? Do you think the DSLR cameras will vanish from the market because smartphones have such powerful cameras now, right? Why do people take pictures of themselves these days? General questions based on photography, where you again have to come up with detailed answers to those, right? So like I said, there are areas where your marks can be deducted here. So let us also look at that, some strategy, right? So you have to be able to speak fluently. That's very important. In case of speaking, on what basis? Yes, that's it. That is where we are, right? On cue. So you have to speak fluently, first of all, and you should be able to link ideas coherently. Now, when I say fluently, a lot of students misunderstand this for speed. Fluency has nothing to do with the speed of your speech, nothing at all. You can speak slowly, you can speak in a moderate speech, moderate rate. You can also talk in a faster rate, that's fine. Fluently means you should be able to come up with the right kind of language, the right kind of thought. You're not taking a lot of breaks, basically. You're not saying a lot of ers and ahs, and you're thinking, oh, now what do I say? I know the word, it's just there, but I can't say it. These are problems which are non-fluent, right? So if you do showcase this fluency, you've done a good job. If you're not fluent, if you break down after every sentence and you're thinking of which word do I use, you're definitely going to lose out on marks. Linking ideas coherently is also how do you develop your answer, right? So they're asking you a question saying, what kind of music do you like to listen to? And you're saying, oh, usually I don't like to listen to a specific genre, but I prefer instrumental music more than singing. Good answer, because you've been able to explain the answer properly, right? If you just say that, oh, I like to listen to instrumental music, end of the answer. You're just given an opinion, but you've not been able to develop that. So you have to develop your ideas as well. That is very important. Thought extension. Yeah, if you don't extend your thought correctly and you give very short answers, you have to definitely be on the negative side then, right? Here as well, you have to demonstrate a range of vocabulary, and this is the word which misleads a lot of students. Range is all right. Range means you should not be repeating the same word again and again and again and again. You should use some synonyms here and there, but those synonyms need to be appropriate. Right? This is the most important word. Students just think of range and they forget the word appropriate. Yeah? Because that's the challenge in the English language. One word can have 10, 15, 20 synonyms, but all those synonyms cannot be used for that one specific situation. So you need to know which synonyms are applicable here and which are not. And only those which are applicable, you should be using those synonyms while speaking. Appropriate range of vocabulary, right? You also have to use accurate grammar. So if you don't use the correct grammatical structures, obviously there is negative marking. Appropriate language. So this is just a conversation between you and the examiner, and the examiner will try and make sure that it's a very comfortable setting for you. Suddenly, it doesn't mean that you suddenly start speaking in slang. You know, you're using words like buddy and awesome and, you know, things like that. That's not really right. It's still a test, still an exam. So you have to keep that in your mind too. Yeah. And you have to speak so that the listener can understand. This means your pronunciation of words should be very clear. If you're pronouncing a word in such a way that I am not able to really understand the word, as an examiner, I cannot mark you for that particular word. And so I will give you a negative mark because I would be like, no, I was just not able to understand what the word was. Yeah. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind. This is where negative marking comes in. If you're clear, your ideas are not clear, if your vocabulary is not proper, if there are problems with your grammar, and if you're not saying the words in the correct manner. Yeah. So that's where the negative marking comes in. Right. So I would also like to talk a bit about how your scores are calculated, what they are as well. Right. So IELTS now, because it's a system, it's not just a test. We've seen how every section follows a very clear structure. It's done in a very systematic way. Listening, there are 4 audios. Reading, there are 3 passages. Writing, there are 2 questions. Speaking, again, there are 3 parts. Everything is happening in a very fixed structure. That's why it's a system. And because it's a system, it provides a candidate's, a profile of the candidate's ability to use English, right? And you get scores on a band scale from 0 to 9. So what they do is they give you a band score for listening, and 1 for reading, and 1 for writing, and 1 for speaking. Yeah, your total IELTS score is actually just the average. Yeah, so the total IELTS score is basically calculated like this. So they club your listening, reading, writing, and speaking scores together and they divide it by 4, right? So that is how this is calculated. You get a band score in every module out of 9, and that band score is then aggregated, divided by 4, you get the total score, right? I'm going to share the meanings of these scores with all of you as well. What do they mean, right? So if you book a test but you are not able to make it to the center for any reason, you get a 0. This is one thing which I learned while I was in China as well. You know how Chinese people like copying and pasting, right? So a lot of my students, you know, they were lucky and unlucky both. They went through these a lot of number of websites here and there and found content here. So they used to learn the, you know, answers which are there, which are present on the internet. Luckily or unluckily, if they get the same question in the test, they used to just copy and paste from their minds, right? The entire thing. If you do that on the IELTS writing or speaking test, if you don't give an original answer, if you give a copied answer, you get a 0. Because these examiners, the Cambridge examiners, they're certified, remember, they get their certification only for that. It's a very difficult examination that one person has to go through if he wants to become an examiner. So the examiner knows everything. If you have read the answer online, the examiner also has. And the examiner knows the exact words which are used in the language, in that answer. The examiner knows the language of the response. So if he or she detects, you know, not original language, you'll get a 0. So please be careful there, right? So 1 is a non-user, 2 is intermittent, 3 is extremely limited, 4 is limited, and 5 is modest. Now, if you've had your primary education in English, primary onwards, that is primary, secondary, and tertiary, if you've had that education in English medium, you are not looking at 5 or lower, to be honest with all of you, right? Now, if you're thinking of criteria, the minimum that all of you need is 6 band in every module. That's the minimum, right? An overall band score of 6.5 with no bands less than 6. That is the criteria for a lot of institutions across the world. Yeah. So the next slide is going to be on band 6. So I would like all of you to take 1 minute, read the description of band 6. Okay, here it is. And then tell me if you think that you already are a competent user of the English language, right? So, okay, for some of you, obviously it's going to be different as well. But like I said, most of the universities follow this. So please read this, take 1 minute. Tell me, are you already a competent user? What do you think? Take your time. Wonderful. We've got responses already. And I'm so happy to read the yes as a response. That is wonderful. All right. See, even if you are not confident, if, you know, I am still confident that most of you are already here. That's great. Kushi, that's your minimum criteria, or that's the target that you've set for yourself? Right. So that's good. All of you are saying minimum criteria. Okay, fine. Right. So you're going to get a band 6 if you're a competent user of the English language. So see, they're giving you a band 6 even if you have some inaccuracies in your language, if you use it inappropriately, or if there are some misunderstandings in your language, they're still giving you a band 6. Why? Because when it comes to familiar topics, you know, if a topic that you've already studied in your school or university life, then you can understand a complex language. You can also use a fairly complex language in that kind of a situation. Therefore, in this batch or in this class, we're not really going to look at band 6 or lower, right? The target that we have set for ourselves, obviously, is a minimum of 7, which means a good user of English language. Then we have 8, which means a very good user of the English language. And then we also have 9, which means an expert user of the English language. Obviously, there are scores in between as well. There's a 7.5 here and there is an 8.5 here, but we don't have descriptors for them, right? So it doesn't say that if 7 is a good user, 7.5 is a better user. We don't know that. right? But these are the 5 target scores: 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, 9. Yeah. I have seen a lot of students, hundreds of students actually get to this band 9 in listening, and a lot of them also get to a band 9 in reading. It is definitely possible. All of you have to do is to just make sure that when we start with the strategies, you just have to make sure that you practice enough with those strategies, right? See, I am definitely going to give my 120% here. Like I said, my goal, I have a very clear goal here. I need to ensure that all of you get to that band score or even better your target band, whatever you have in your mind. I'll be really happy if you go over that. But I want to ensure that all of you get at least the minimum that you have as a target, right? So for you have to also have a target, and that target is when we talk about some strategy or some tip or some let's say kind of approach or way to approach questions, you take that and you start practicing with that at home. If you put some effort from your end, it's not going to be a difficult journey, and I'm hoping that it's going to be something that's going to end up into a satisfying end result. It's a beautiful journey. It's a very interesting test, this IELTS, and there are wonderful parameters that have been set as well. So everything is going to be clearly laid out in front of all of you. All you have to do is then pick those up, things that we discuss, and just put in some effort at home. Yeah. So obviously, I always keep the last 5 minutes for Q&A, and that is what I have kept today as well. So thank you for listening to this very patiently. But if there are any specific questions, I would definitely like to answer. Doubts about the UKVI, Hiren, I think, a better person for that would be the counselor that you're in touch with. Your counselor, because, the counselors have much, much better ideas of the country that they look for. So if you can connect your counselor about UK, they'll be able to give you a much, much better understanding of that. How to improve vocab? Kushi, that's a great question. So the answer is here. Right? So when you listen to these different things, when you start reading from these different sources, right? Whatever, newspapers, magazines, you are definitely going to come across new words. What I want all of you to do is to write down that new word, whichever new word you come across. You write it down, you write down the meaning of that new word, and you also write down the meaning of that word in your mother tongue. It's very important. Whichever language you speak at home. See, the biggest advantage of that is that you remember the word for a longer duration. If you just write the word in English and its meaning in English, you're going to remember it for 1-2 days max. If you write the meaning in your mother tongue, that span gets doubled, minimum 4 days, right? So that is how you try and build up the vocab, and then try and use the word in different situations as well. That is going to help you. Yeah, so that's one way of building it. How to manage time for academic reading? That's also a very good question, Divya. So first and the shortest answer to that is skimming and scanning. These strategies, they almost guarantee that you end up saving time, right? But apart from that, there are also different question types which can help you. So once we start practicing, I'll also tell you how you need to categorize, those strengths and weaknesses, and how you can prioritize one question over the other. Right? So that is going to help you as well. I have to work on word limit. Sure. Yes, not a problem. It's very simple, Kushi. And once we start with the writing section, I'll also give you all a brief of the official answer sheets of the IELTS. So you'll look at the official answer sheets, and I'll also tell you that very simple formula of, getting to the right word limit, making sure that you've written the minimum in both the questions. Don't worry. Yeah. Anything else then? Anyone? Any specific questions, doubts about the IELTS, about these classes? Sure, no problem. Okay, yes, one more, and that is no. Okay, when will the classes start? Yes, so the classes will start from tomorrow, Cheryl. That's an important question. We are going to start our regular classes from tomorrow at the same time. 10:30 to 12 is going to be the duration. And if you want to register for the class, all you have to do is to get in touch with the counselor, your counselor, and you register with them. Yeah, sure, not a problem. Okay, anything else? Oh, I can see one more question there. There are different types of essays, Divya, correct? How to analyze and answer. Yeah, there is obviously there is a structure for every question type as well, right? And once we start with the writing question 2 here in the batch, I'll talk about all those different question types, and we'll also discuss these different structures as well. Yeah, so that all of you know what your structure needs to be, how do you approach it, what kind of language you need, all of that would be covered. Yes, anything else? Any more talks on computer based IELTS for a person who's regular computer use? Yes. So Pooja, for that, one thing which you have to keep in mind is that your interface is a bit different, right? So if you go to the IDP IELTS website, you'll find some sample questions for the computer delivered IELTS. So one thing is that I would like you to solve them, all of those questions for the listening, reading, writing. Obviously, there's nothing on speaking, but you solve those questions, you at least get used to the interface. You know what you're expected to do. And then compare that with the pen and paper IELTS and the things that you can do here. And then take a call which one you would be more comfortable with. Yeah, so just make sure that you're familiar with the interface. If you want, I'll definitely be able to share a link with all of you later so that you can practice. So the classes would be 6 days a week, Pavleen, from Monday to Saturday, right? The second batch is, we're not yet sure about that. Harleen, you'll have to get in touch with your counselor, obviously, and they'll be able to tell you, right? So Monday to Saturday would be class timings, but this week we are going to do it only till Friday. Usually the second and the fourth Saturdays are my days off, right? So those 2 days I prefer spending them with family or friends, and therefore no classes on second and fourth Saturdays, but otherwise we'll have classes from Mondays to Saturdays. Yeah, right. Anything else? Okay, then. So thanks a lot for being such a wonderful and lively audience. I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful time in the batch. I look forward to all of you being there. Yeah. Thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.